The Syrian war has been focused on Aleppo, eastern Aleppo, and while the last remaining evacuations were taking place, an incident in neighboring Turkey occurs which may reflect a blow back from Turkey's involvement in this war on Syria. The ambassador of another country gets assassinated, the Russian ambassador nonetheless. The killer associated the killing with Aleppo. In this debate, we'll look at Turkey's involvement in the war, the degree of their involvement, and how Russia will interpret this incident.
An exhibition meant to feature artworks in the Turkish capital turned into a murder scene Monday when a member of the Ankara riot police fatally shot Russia's ambassador to the country. Ambassador Andrei Karlov was several minutes into speech when he was shot by 22-year-old Mevlut Merdayedintash. The assailant was heard shouting, "Don't forget Aleppo," in reference to the Syrian city, which was recently liberated of anti-Damascus terrorists thanks to Russia's military help. Soon after, Turkish special forces surrounded the gallery and killed the attacker. Turkish security officials alleged that the gunman was linked to US-based Turkish opposition figure Fethullah Gulen, whom Ankara accuses of orchestrating the failed July coup. Gulen, however, has condemned the killing of the Russian envoy as a heinous act of terror, laying the blame on the worsening security situation due to the Turkish government's mass purges of security personnel. The incident took place at a time of diplomatic thaw between Russia and Turkey, whose relations strained following Turkey's shooting down of a Russian fighter jet in November last year. The leaders of the two countries, who mended fences after the July failed coup, were quick to call the shooting an act of provocation aimed at sabotaging their warming ties.
I describe this attack on Russia's embassy as an attack to Turkey, Turkey's state and nation. After the incident, during the talk with Mr. Putin, we agreed this is a provocation and there isn't any dispute.
The crime that was committed is without doubt a provocation aimed at disrupting the normalization of Russian-Turkish relations.
President Putin further called the attack a ploy to disrupt the peace process in Syria that is being actively advanced by Moscow, Ankara and Tehran. The fatal shooting of the Russian envoy also sparked angry international reactions. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Bahram Ghasemi denounced the killing as a ferocious crime. Ghasemi said the incident revealed that Takfiri terrorists are not bound by any international regulations and seek to destabilize the region. The US and Germany also wrapped the attack, whereas the UN Security Council in a statement condemned it as an act of terror. The assassination of the Russian ambassador and the security lapse that allowed it to happen has definitely angered Putin and Russians. But in the medium term, Moscow and Ankara seem pretty much determined to unite in an anti-terror alliance.
I guess joining us for this edition of The Debate, editor and researcher at SOT.net, Joe Quinn joins us from Paris, and we have independent scholar Peter Sennett, who joins us from New York. Gentlemen, welcome. Joe Quinn, let me first get a reaction from you, and let's put this scenario forward. You have a Turkish cop. He makes his way to a specific location, and it's not just any location. It's a public location, but it's an art exhibition, and gets so close to the Russian ambassador to be able to draw his gun and kill him, multiple gunshot wounds. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, if you've seen the video of the shooting, unfortunately, it was a brutal murder of an innocent man who obviously did not deserve to die or be shot in the back in that way. But in terms of the security aspect of it, one of the videos, you can see the shooter is actually in the background, and he was meant to be there to provide protection for the ambassador, and you see him standing there for a few minutes just listening to the ambassador speak, and then he decides to reach for his gun and shoot him twice, and then go on this rant about Syria, making himself look ridiculous. So from that point of view, yeah, there's obviously a serious security problem, but even more so than that, it brings up big questions about who really controls the security forces in Syria, or sorry, in Turkey. Does Erdogan really have a handle on that situation? You know, and of course there's other incidents in the past that suggested that he really doesn't. Obviously, I'm referring to the coup in July this year, which exposed the fact that there was, at least then, this network of fifth columnists essentially working for, well, we can speculate as to who they were working for, but I think it's pretty obvious.
Peter Sennett, what type of message does this assassination send, especially the message of the killer on the other side of this, in which he said, "Don't forget Aleppo," which was part of his motivation by that statement, perhaps one of the major motivations behind why he assassinated, I'm guessing, the Russian ambassador to Turkey?
I think it's very important to note that he took a hotel room in the neighborhood first. So this was a planned assassination. He used the cover of his police identity to get past the security guard. And this was a point where the Russian ambassador, frankly, didn't have his security contingent with him. So all of those things will change. They'll become more tight. But his message is he is trying to make this into a major focus for continuing this war and making it into a broader war. So in many ways, he's acting in the spirit of ISIS. He's acting, in a sense, as in the spirit of turning the war into a larger war. And I think it's quite clear that this is not really a Gulen activist at all, despite his uncles having taught in a high school of theirs. I think this is very clear a radical militant Islamic man who planned this assassination. Now, this idea of Remember Aleppo, he's trying to make this into a new cause to unite certain militants to continue war actions, not only in the Middle East, but in Europe as well.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick time out to point out to the terminology that Peter Sinnott used there. And this is just so, at least for our viewers, that they understand that Islamic militancy is not a terminology that, in particular, go hand in hand, because that is the interpretation when that type of characterization is used. And I'd just like that to be clear. Of course, our guests can use that. They're free to use those words, but they're not necessarily two words that go hand in hand. Joe Quinn, this particular 22-year-old young...
I should have added a third word, radical Islamic militant.
Okay, well this is the thing, Peter Sinnott, when we use Islam, even in the context, even if the situation warrants it within the terminologies that you used, then the obvious interpretation is going to be from outsiders who are not Muslims that Islam spells violence. Even though the particular person, and this could be another topic for another debate, which we won't get into. However, Joe Quinn, this is some of the other statements that this attacker who assassinated the Russian ambassador said. He said that unless our towns are secure, you won't enjoy security. Only death can take me from here. Sounds awfully a lot like some of the slogans that Jabhat al-Nusra, which is an al-Qaeda group, uses. Do you think then, even though there's been no claim of responsibility, that perhaps he has had outside influence from al-Qaeda?
Well, I mean, that seems pretty clear based on what he said and the way that he brutally murdered this Russian ambassador, and obviously in the context of the actions of Russia along with the Syrian military in Syria in defeating these Western-backed mercenaries, effectively. The fact that he would kill this ambassador at this time suggests that he was very much aligned with those people, if not one of them himself, or he was taken with their ideology and shared their ideology. So, yes, absolutely.
Peter Sinnott, you know, you're having this incident happen at the time when Russia and the Syrian army have been very successful in the liberation of Aleppo. And it was towards the final stages, and it comes after much talk and pushback from the U.S., not pushback, but rather arguing that they should stop, they meaning Russia and the Syrian army, to stop their liberation of Aleppo. Do you think this is a backlash against Russian military involvement as a whole in the Syrian war?
I do believe so, and I think it's part of a broader spectrum of related to the Chechen situation as well, and the Chechen wars against Russia. So you've had a very long period of Russia being seen as an enemy by many forces such as Al-Qaeda and also by many in the ISIL and so on. So Russia as a target, is not that hard to understand. It should be noted that the Al-Qaeda actually has a very long and very successful small units operations in Turkey. And in fact, it was even in the early mid-'80s that when the idea of a liberation movement for the occupied Muslim lands was put together, and I saw this coming about in Pakistan. They were recruiting Turks then. And so I think this is part of a very long-standing movement, and I think that what they want now is to make Russia be a target again. Russia's been a target before, and I think Russia will be a target again. But the fact that everything's happening over a short period of time, whether it's attacks, even the attack in Ankara, shooting off 8 rounds of a shotgun. There's what happened in Yemen, what happened in Jordan. We are seeing a real period of very intense attacks. And I think, of course, what Europe has been through this year just adds to it. So we're seeing a very clear shift now towards a higher level of terrorism in a much broader spectrum, and Russia's just now included.
So, Joe Quinn, what do you think about what Peter Sinnott said there? Because it seems like if these terrorists are getting squeezed, that it's kind of like something bursting, and they're going to go out and commit acts of terrorism. There have been the U.S. Embassy, in which you had, I guess, a gunman unleash some of his rounds there, of which the U.S. Embassy closed its consulate. The Iranian Embassy followed suit. And then, of course, you had what's happening pretty much around the world, as Peter Sinnott said. Do you think that these terrorists are getting squeezed?
Not really, because, I mean, from my perspective, the whole terrorism, what's called, as you took exception with, Islamic terrorism or Muslim terrorism, is largely a kind of manufactured version of terrorism. Like, I refer to these people, I refer to them preferentially as mercenaries, because that's effectively what they are. And mercenaries work usually for a state apparatus. And while your guest said that Russia has been a target or seen as an enemy by groups like Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra in recent years, the USA also sees Russia quite clearly as a major target and as an enemy. They've said as much. The US government has said as much. So when we see this convergence of two groups or two entities, the US government on the one hand lambasting Russia and demonizing and condemning Russia at every opportunity, and at the same time then you see so-called Islamic terrorists, quote unquote, who are actually mercenaries, really mercenaries in the pay of the US government, attacking Russia. Well, then this to me seems simply like effectively a Western or US attack on Russia by other means.
Well, Peter Sinnott, one of the things that has also been blamed is this process for peace that is now beginning to start, that has started already. And overall, it was meant by this attack, deductions have been made that they wanted to sabotage this. They, I should say he, that the person who assassinated the Russian ambassador. I'd like to get your reaction to what the tripartite talks that are going to take place between Russia, Iran, and Turkey. The Russian foreign minister used the word guarantors of Syria. The ministers agree with the importance of widening the ceasefire, of free access of humanitarian aid, and that Russia, Iran, and Turkey are ready to assist in preparing the agreements in the making between the Syrian government and the opposition, and to become its guarantor. So it seems like I'm interpreting that as being that Russia and Iran and Turkey are really going to make this peace talk work. Do you interpret it that way?
Unfortunately not. I believe the war isn't over. Unfortunately, until Raqqa and until the destruction of ISIL isn't a real accomplishment, no one can pretend to be a guarantor of peace in Syria, because this is an ongoing war. They may have won, this is, right now, it looks like a Pyrrhic victory. They've won East eastern Aleppo at the cost of it being depopulated and being in rubble. So it's very hard to see this as a guarantor of peace. Right now, this is a situation where you have an alliance, which could be in a military alliance, but the forces are not yet defeated by any means. They may have fallen in eastern Aleppo, but this war seems to be going on, and I wouldn't expect it to be such a quick victory. Really, Raqqa used to be part of Syria, so until Raqqa falls, this is not going to cannot be considered anything as short of still an ongoing war. It's what it is.
So, what forces are you referring to?
Well, the first thing is that you still have militant forces that are fighting the Assad regime that are not part of ISIL. And you still have ISIL there in Syria. So the war is not over by any means. Their main structure in eastern Aleppo has fallen and the city is depopulated. But beyond that, you do not have the control of territory. So this still remains a shambles. You still have millions and millions living abroad. So we're very far from anybody being a guarantor of peace. You may form a military alliance that will mean something in the future, but they're far from being guarantors of peace.
Joe Quinn, do you think that the peace talks that are conducted by Russia, or being conducted by Russia, Syria, and Turkey, are a step towards the end, or do you not see them as being successful?
I think that would depend on the real guarantors of peace, or the individual, or the entities that can truly be the guarantors of peace in Syria, and that would be the people who are responsible for the 4 or 5 year long war in Syria, and that's the U.S. government and some European governments and their Gulf allies, who have been, it's well known to everybody that they've been supplying weapons and money and training, etc., to these mercenary types, and have flooded Syria with them, specifically for the purpose of overthrowing the Assad government. It's not the Assad regime, as your guest was just saying. It's the Assad government. The government of Bashar al-Assad was elected democratically, actually, in 2014, and it was overseen by, I think, 30 different international election observers who all verified it as fair and honest elections. That was in 2014, and he won by 80% of the vote. So it's not a regime, it's a government, and it's being attacked, and has been attacked for the past 4 or 5 years by forces in the pay of, effectively, the US government, certain European governments, and their allies in the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. This is all very well known. This is not a civil war situation. This is an attack by foreign entities on the Syrian government and the Syrian people, and the blame for all of the deaths over the past 4 or 5 years lies squarely at the doors of the US government, European governments, and Saudi Arabia and Qatar particularly. So if there's going to be peace, I think that would depend on the enthusiasm that the US government and these entities that I mentioned have for more war. If they're going to continue to insist on the removal of Assad, it seems very unlikely now that Russia, Turkey, and Iran are all in alignment. But these people they're essentially psychopaths, so there's no way to know if they'll stop in their madness, effectively, and the slaughter of innocent civilians in Syria.
Well, I'd like to ask you, Peter Sinnott, the UN Security Council session, emergency session on Syria yesterday, had Bashar al-Jafari come up to the reporters afterwards, in which there was a Q&A, and Bashar al-Jafari pointed out to a number of intelligence officers of this so-called Free Syrian Army that represented a wide variety of nationalities. One Israeli, one American, you had a number of Saudis, Qatari, Moroccan, and they, even some reports indicating that they were actually stationed in East Aleppo in a bunker. But he threw out the names, and he said that this is the coalition that is being supported and funded by some of the major players, like the US, like Saudi Arabia. And that's the reason why that emergency session was put in place, and the main reason why the US wanted the operations by Syrian Arab Army and Russia to stop, because these are intelligence officers of these respective countries, and they wanted to get them out of there. Do you believe the statements there by Bashar al-Jafari that he made about this? The reports are all on the net. Even the Times of Israel reported on this.
Well, the reason I don't believe it, I mean, if the United States was actually really concerned and really had a stake in this fighting, I think you would have seen a much higher level of involvement than talking about some American that happens to be there. What we actually had were a large battalion of Shia Pakistanis fighting. We've had, of course, Hezbollah fighting. We've had Iran fighting. So it has been an international battle. But you know, the American forces that are there in Syria are acting in a different context for aerial, basically coordinating aerial attacks against ISIL. So you know, this old thing that the U.S. is behind everything, it's really pretty sad, because it's just, if it were true, it would be a very different situation. It's quite clear that President Obama shirked his duty on Syria, you know, when he drew the red line, and then he did nothing after they used chemical weapons against their own people by the Assad dynasty or regime. They used all sorts of barrel bombs and this, you know, constant bombing of hospitals and the civilian areas in general, which are seen by air photos of Aleppo. That's what really happened. And, you know, the U.S. Really didn't take a role. They could have, and some might say they should have.
Okay, I got to jump in and get a last statement there from Joe Quinn. Joe Quinn,
against ISIS,
we have
even then,
the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Sorry, Peter Sinnott. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has chosen Tillerson for the next Secretary of State with close ties to Russia. What move do you think that signifies when it comes to the Syrian war and U.S.'s relation with Russia in that regards? 30 seconds, please.
I think it's good news for the Syrian conflict that maybe the U.S. will pull its horns in, and it's good news for Russian-U.S. relations. Certainly far better than John Kerry and Hillary Clinton, and the prospect of Hillary Clinton as president. So yeah, it's as good as it can get, let's say. But I just want to say that everything your guest just said there in the last couple of minutes is complete nonsense.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Editor and researcher at SOT.net, Joe Quinn there from Paris, and independent scholar Peter Sinnott spoke to us from New York. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From Miko Atapwe and the entire team in the capital, Tehran. Goodbye.